I'm going to go straight into this presentation because I have a lot of information that I'm going to share with you today. Okay, so I'd first like to pay my respects to the traditional landowners that have been and are present and are to come. This presentation has been a showcase of the vision that has been shown to me that has been working with spirit and science to lift the veil of consciousness. And so I'm very excited to be able to share this with everybody today, as it's the first time I'm actually going to be revealing this project. So first I want to start off with the astrology of 2020 posted on January 2nd, 2020 by a friend of mine who's an astrologer. And what he showed me was that Jupiter's time in Capricorn is not good for the collective economy. On January 12th, 2020, Saturn perfects a conjunction with Pluto and is laden with heavy themes. Historically, we see ruthless power games being played out on the big board. Last time the two conjoined was the beginning of the Reagan-Thatcher year and the start of the corporate takeover of culture. The time before that was the end of World War II, and the time before that was the outbreak of World War I. So I wonder what could be as unsettling as a world war. So what is this vision that I had? When it first came to me 7 years ago, at that time, the vision just came to me as a grid surrounding the most populated areas that would be lifted through the inside of these energies that are surrounding the grid. And so at this point, all I knew was that the ley lines were really important and that there was going to be some sort of necessity for us to use these ley lines in a gridding form. And later on, I actually realized through process of bringing through this vision that what I was seeing was activated and healed areas of land around the cities and within the suburbs, connecting through the earth grid lines or the song lines to create to clear the density and heal people and reverse the cycles of destruction on the planet and replenish the earth. So here we have just a normal map that I found, and I've actually put these little suns of like an example of these activated and cleared areas that I was envisioning and how they would connect into the grids of the ley lines so that you guys can understand. At the time, I only had one clue, and this was around the toroidal fields of trees. At the time, this information came through studies that I was doing on crystals with my mentor, Dr. Robert Gilbert from the Vesica Institute. And Robert was talking of a man who was doing studies with grandparent trees using a combination of silica, volcanic ash, and grape husks to create toroidal fields around the trees to send the information to other sibling plants and healing on the grid lines. And so this started my first clue around how this kind of healing was going to take place through the information of the ley lines, using plants, the grandparent trees to actually send this information, and how we could start using things like combinations of silica, volcanic ash, which I've actually sourced now. So this is totally possible. So what is the density in our fields? I think it's really important that we first understand what is it that we're talking about when we talk about density. So here we have a picture from a dowsing association, and what the dowser does is it picks up these ley lines, and these ley lines are all across the land, and they are vertical and horizontal. And so the natural earth grid lines that are already projecting harmful negative energies, they can affect the land. And this can be found where you can see all of these, areas that there's damage to growth of, say, a hedge over on the bottom. Then if you can move up a little bit, there might be an area on like some kind of road where there might be a lot of accidents that happen. And then you might see where there's this tree that's growing all warped and it might have cancer in the tree. And this is another indication of a ley line on the earth. And what's really concerning is when these ley lines cross each other. And when they start to cross each other, that's when they start to create a doubling up effect. And so in these specific areas, they might be lightning areas of where the zone crossing is. But what you really want to be careful is when these lines cross each other, especially when you're living underneath these zones. So if you go to the house, you'll see that there could be a a bed that's underneath these crossover of lines, and you could be sleeping over that crossover. And so I've given you another example here. And so you can see on the bottom is an overlapping of a Hartman and Curry grid zone. So that's what they call them, is the Hartman and Curry grid zones. And here you can see a big fat line that's going straight through somebody's bed. And then you can see all of the smaller lines, which this is typical of the Earth grid lines. There's the fat ones that come every 20 or so meters, and then you have the thinner ones that are about a foot apart from each other. But what happens when you get one that's that bad, which is a thick one crossed over with multiple small ones, is that you can start to see that there are cancerous situations in the person's body. But what can actually make it worse is if you have things like electronic clocks or mirrors that also amplify these lines due to their effects in their field. And this is kind of what I wanted to start getting you guys to understand, is that, you know, these fields, we cannot see them, but what biogeometry by Dr. Ibrahim Karim created was tools that could detect these earth ley lines and detrimental qualities that harm our body, and not just detect them, but find out what level of quality they are, so that we could find out, you know, what they were doing to our bodies, to our organs, to our different levels of our field. And so this is part of what I'm going to be sharing with you today. So one of the examples that I want to share with you is an actual client that I had whose daughter was absolutely having a terrible time falling asleep. She actually was thinking that there might be a bad spirit in her house. And so she called me over so that I could do a clearing for any spirits. But I actually suggested that we do a clearing of any of the energy lines first to see what was happening. And sure enough, when we did the clearing, we found one of these fat lines going straight through her daughter's bed, which was a massive indication of why her daughter, who is less than 2 years old, wasn't able to sleep, because children are so much more sensitive to these lines than us adults, because as we grow older, we become less sensitive to them and we become accustomed to their resonance. And so what was happening with with her daughter was that she was kicking and screaming and waking up to 7 times a night, just because she couldn't handle the frequency that this ley line was bringing through. So this was part of why I wanted to share with you the actual example of this ley line, and how sometimes we might not even realize that we're over these ley lines and what they could be doing to our body. Now, when I was saying to you that, you know, having the ley lines is just one part of where we're starting with, then we start to go into what actually adds extra disturbances to these lines. And that's when we start to see the effects of what things like, you know, pay TV dishes and power boards and smart meters that you can see around the home that will also be pumping into the field of these ley lines, especially if they overlap the detrimental ones. They will also be sending that energy into the home, into our bodies. And this is also a photo of something of my actually own home when I moved in, and I noticed that these were in the home, and I was waking up feeling so depleted, lethargic, having aches and pains in my body. And it wasn't until I actually corrected these that I actually had a change in my body. And so things like phone lines, cell towers, TV satellites, smart meters, and electricity plugs, especially near our head and near our bed when we're sleeping, are all contributing to extra energy in our field that has a negative effect. But then if you add in the home wireless devices like the iPads, the Wi-Fi modems, and the routers, the range extenders, who has a range extender in their house? Almost everyone. We've got the laptops, the speakers, the smartwatch, the Google Home, the gaming consoles, and more, all emitting radiation that affects your home. And they also affect the animals in your home. They affect the birds and the bees and the life outside of your home, because they're connecting in through all of these fields. And so they are pumping that energy through the energy lines. And what's kind of alarming is that on average, Americans have about 25 smart devices in their homes. So even if that wasn't bad enough, then you start to see where this is going down rabbit hole with all of these home wireless devices, and now the 5G towers that are being placed around the globe and on these earth lines. So in an effort to spark this new technological revolution in hopes of, surpassing the industrial revolution damages to the planet, we're actually unaware of the disastrous effects it's having on the Earth planet because of the radiations that are being sent through these wireless technologies and how they're connecting into these detrimental lines that we're living up on top of. But not only are we living on top of them, might I add, I'm not against technology and how it benefits humanity, but what we're not talking and taking into consideration is that the massive amounts of interference that is happening because of the fact that we live now in highly populated, dense cities that have apartment blocks on top of each other that look beautiful, but then they're all emitting 25 or so, wireless devices on top of each other that are then on top of ley lines that are then on top of electricity and 5G and all of these other things that are emitting into the field, and we are all absorbing that at the moment, which is why I'm here to talk about how this vision is so important. So if you are somebody that is aware of all of this, then you can start to see the canary in the coal mine that's coming up. Now, we've put together all of those things. Now take into consideration on top of that, we have coal mining, fracking, polluting our water, nuclear energy, GMO, and how that affects the earth is all going into the fields. And you can start to see that this is not only just going into our fields, this is going into our bodies. And so we're dealing with a very serious issue. And not only is this a serious issue, but we are running out of time. So we kind of need a miracle, or we need to start putting our thinking caps and coming up with a really strong solution that can sort this out and get it done as quickly as possible. So what are we up against? If you have Netflix and you are interested in watching the latest David Attenborough Breaking Boundaries with the Science of Our Planet with the Professor Johan Rockstrom, it is really, really pivotal that we all get on board. And here are some of the findings that they share that we all need to be aware of. So this is what science has already concluded. Deforestation and other land use changes. The boundary that we had was to maintain 75% of the planet's original forest. Like, the forest is the lungs of this planet. And where we are today is we're already down to 62% of deforestation. So what has that already created when we've broken that boundary of, where we should be at for us to keep this harmony state within the planet? The addition of phosphorus, nitrogen, and other elements to the world's crops and ecosystems. So the boundary was a worldwide use per year of about 11 teragrams of phosphorus and 62 TGs of nitrogen. And where we are today is up to 22 TGs per year of phosphorus and 150 TGs of nitrogen. So you can start to see all of these chemicals that are being placed into the land have already started to create these effects that we're seeing. Lost biodiversity as species become extinct. The boundary was to maintain 90% of biodiversity, and where we are today is biodiversity has dropped to 84% in parts of the world such as Africa. And so we're seeing more and more species becoming extinct, and this is having drastic effects to the ecosystems. Climate change, the boundary atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide at no more than 350 ppms. And where we are today is a carbon dioxide level of at 400 ppm and climbing. So we are definitely hitting over these boundaries and seeing the climate effects and what they're doing. So what are the symptoms of density contamination? Some of these symptoms can be headaches, aches and pains, fuzziness, tired on waking, sleeplessness, brain fog, irritability, physical disease like cancers, negative emotions like depression, anxiety, to name a few. So like I was saying, just from those experience I had with the satellite and the PowerPoints and all of that just in my home when I woke up, I had feelings of all of that until I made the corrections. So I'm going on 40, and it was only 25 years ago when you would still see Nonna's garden. And that's what my Nonna's garden used to look like, with all of the styrofoam, plants that were planted in from all of the veggies that she would pick up from the markets. So we didn't have mobile phones, which meant we had more presence. There was less Wi-Fi interference, so our bodies had less stress and more time to recharge. Kids played on the streets, not on video games. Now we're addicted to shopping, sugar, or the next hit to ease our unease in our body. We're working longer hours and dealing with higher levels of stress. The concrete jungle is layered with all of these fields that are depleting us, and due to the lack of social interaction, mental and emotional health problems are on the rise. So this is just an awareness that I want to bring to you. So I want to get into what are fields. In pranic healing created by Grandmaster Chokok Sui, we learn the energy body is a replica of our physical body, so a macro of the micro. So what we see in the physical body, we see also in the energetic body. My first understanding of fields through healing the energy or aura started with becoming an energy healer in 2007. It introduced me to the importance of energy hygiene and prevention of contamination for the benefit of our overall health, vitality, and spirit, and the miraculous healings that would occur from working with the fields or energy body. And one of the things I really liked about pranic healing was that they did use science to prove what was happening with the energy body. And we can see here the Kirlian photography, and this was, in 1996, that it was still very new, but they were showing what was happening to the bioplasmic energetic field around the whole body. And basically, after this patient had a clearing with pranic healing, they started to see the results in their energy body. And for me personally, I have seen time and time and again miraculous healings that have happened through energetic healing, but also just from the prevention of contamination from happening, which is what I've been doing a lot of, is learning how to use energy. So pranic healing uses energy transfer through the hands, like a modern form of shamanism, and anyone can do it. The energy body holds our trauma, but it also how we filter our reality through a cellular level to spirit level through resonance in our field. So you can see here on one side, we have a healthy aura, and that healthy aura is experiencing everything as a resonance that it's coming into action and reaction with. Whereas on the other side, you see this person's field has got, depletion, it's got holes, it's got all this contamination, and all of those are different effects of how the field has been contaminated. And what it starts to do is it starts to attract that same feeling or that same resonance in its body. So for somebody that doesn't know what a field is or how to identify with a field, if you're totally aware of whether you have one or not, you're in your field when you have that feeling when someone is watching you, because what's happening is you're aware through your field that there's somebody that's putting their attention on you. And what happens is energy, intention follows energy. And so the intention of that person is to look at you, and you can trial it out. You can stare at somebody, and sure enough, within a certain amount of seconds, I highly doubt less than a minute, that person looks at you because they can feel you looking at them. And another way of understanding our field is like the way that you become aware of your car. If you've been driving for a long time, it becomes like this second skin, and it's kind of like the car becomes you, and you filter your actual field through the car. So that's just one way of understanding fields and how they show up in our life. So our life is an experience of everything we plugged into. Say we are like our iPhones, and everything that we interact with is the apps. So food, sleep, work, nature, and all these have ability to recharge or deplete us. So this is what our fields filter. Everything you put in, on, and around you is what we're experiencing. And this creates our resonance, consciousness, and emotions. So the thing is, now eating whole foods, organic, getting into nature and sleeping well isn't enough to get what we need due to the tampering of these fields on so many different levels that I just explained to you. And that is what I'm here to explain, is how we can recharge not just ourselves, but the planet too. So I just wanted to show you this map of consciousness and the energetic frequencies that you can see here. And this is all going to come back again. So you can see enlightenment is the 700 to 1000, and then you can start to see the lower levels, which is 20, 30 to 50, which is the guilt, shame, apathy, and it's connected to humiliation, blame, despair, hopeless, evil, miserable energies. And so this is all something that I want you to consider. If there's fields that are creating that, what's contributing to those fields? So one of the people that I started following early on when I was getting into fields was Dr. Bruce Lipton, and how he was talking about the biology of belief and how cells they believed were the key to unlocking health. And so they thought, well, obviously our brain is what creates everything. So they looked in the cell to find the area that was the brain in the cell, and they pulled it out. But what they found was that the cell actually still lived on days after they pulled out the part that had the brain. And so what they realized was it wasn't the brain that was creating the cell. The brain part of the cell was just creating the blueprint, or the part of the cell that needs to create the organs, or the, whatever it is that we replenish. But what was actually creating the cell was the interaction with the cell. So everything that we believe through our mind, everything that we connect into on a physical level, in our environments, in our emotions, was actually recreating the cell, and what was part of the cell's biology and the wisdom that the cells created. So our consciousness has a part to play in our fields, which is what I was coming to. And especially when it comes to mass levels of fear, like the 9/11, I wanted to show you some studies that came through. So there was a coherent consciousness and reduced randomness correlation on September 11, 2001. And so the Global Consciousness Project, the GCP, is an international collaboration of researchers studying interactions of consciousness with the environment. And the GCP maintains a network of random event generators located in over 40 host sites around the world. And these devices generate random data continuously and send it for archiving to a dedicated server in Princeton. And so it's basically numbers 1010 that they would constantly be checking. And what they actually found was that 9/11 and global consciousness was actually connected. And so if you see here in the bottom, I think the data are pretty much indisputable in support of that we do interconnect, we interact, we're not isolated. The project's director, Roger Nelson, explains in the video on the organization's website, my consciousness inside my skull and yours extend out into the world, and they intermix. So we're a little like neurons in a giant brain that we know nothing about. And so this was starting to help to explain these fields in a deeper awareness of how we're interconnected, which then kind of brought me into, okay, well, how do we connect then? And one of my teacher, Dr. Robert Gilbert from Vesica Institute, actually sent me this article when I started talking about magnetite, which I'm going to share a little bit more. But this actual article, the Urantia book, states that all organisms have a biologic sensitivity to the Earth's magnetic field, and that this sensitivity is right on the edge of human consciousness. At the time of its publication in 1955, scientists did not generally believe that biological organisms could have a mechanism that is sensitive to such a subtle electromagnetic field. Now, many migratory and non-migratory animals have been found to possess such sensitivity, and some researchers assert that human beings also can sense the Earth's magnetic field. field. So this is kind of talking about how, some animals like bees and birds, they have this internal navigational, compass, and that this was what they were starting to realize. And that additionally, in the 1960s, the hind lizard startled biologists and geologists alike with this discovery that many animals do what conventional science had considered impossible. They manufacture substances such as iron-containing mineral magnetite, the most magnetically sensitive mineral on Earth, within their bodies. So this basically was showing that these migratory animals, which are the birds, the bees, the whales, generated this magnetite within their bodies, and that they had this uncanny homing instinct that was present from this internal compass. If you're somebody that has not looked at Gaia, this is actually a free Gaia video that you can go look at, and brain crystals and psychic powers. I'm just going to share with you a little bit from within it. So magnetite, like we were saying in that article, works like an antenna for electromagnetic fields connecting our brains to each other and the planet. And so Dr. Robert C. Beck actually did a study where he found that ELF fields of 6.67 hertz to 6.26 hertz and lower tended to produce things like mild nausea, headache, arthritis-like aches, desynchronization, and many other vegetative disturbances. So this is remembering how I was showing you that those level of consciousness and how these consciousness levels are connected through these fields. And this is a study that has also shown that 7.8 to 8.0 and 9.0 created anxiety relief in terms of they created the opposite effect. And so these fields could even connect into higher levels of consciousness. So what these studies were showing is a biological effect of fields, and they showed that these had the ability to affect mood, memory, the stock markets, and learning abilities were also affected by these fields. And this is why fields are so important. So going back to that map of consciousness, you can see these fields in here highlighted, why we need to be conscious of these fields. And one of the things I want to explain to you is that consciousness, when we're talking about this map of consciousness, is awareness, it's perception and thought through this awareness of frequency. So thoughts are electromagnetic frequencies, as we're becoming aware, is that we're all of these electromagnetic bands of frequencies or fields. And what we're understanding from the magnetites is crystals pick up the electromagnetic bands of frequencies, as explained with the magnetite. Now, if magnetite is a crystal and it picks up fields, quartz is a mineral composed of silicon and oxygen atoms, and quartz is the second most abundant mineral in Earth's continental crust. So we're basically all standing upon one massive crystal consciousness that is picking up these electromagnetic frequencies. And not only is it picking up these electromagnetic frequencies, it's plugged into all of these fields, and the fields that we're sending all of this information, not only from ourselves, which I believe is the whole basis of gratitude. When we send out an electromagnetic band of frequency or an energy in motion, then this gets picked up by the crust of the earth and then gets repeated to us. It gets sent back to us. But when we stop disrupting it, with all of these things that I was explaining to you beforehand, what ends up happening is this field ends up getting disrupted, and you start to see a lot more of these lower vibrations that you can see here on this graph. So in the Rosicrucian 4 levels model, they talk about how minerals, so crystals, are the one form that is the most solid and the least like the least able to change. And when I say change, it holds in its structure the physical body form and matter of its energy field. So it's the most suitable for holding a actual resonance or frequency, as long as it's not tampered with, which is why, I do a lot of work with crystals, and also why, I'm such a believer of raw crystals and non-tampered crystals, because when you start to heat treat them and change their colors, and you're starting to break their matrix and their healing qualities. But I just wanted to share with you the reason why crystals are so powerful is they're very different to plants, because plants have a certain type of life force. They will, when they're young and they're growing, they're probably more potent. Then you can dry them, but after a certain amount of time, that function will cease to exist as they deteriorate. With animals, they have this more soul body perceptive ability, but they also are governed by these inner sensations. So they're also fluctuating always from these inner sensations of fight and flight. And humans, all of those, and the I consciousness, that an individuality. And so we are, that constant change and transformation that's happening. So it's really important that we're making sure that we're in resonance with things that keep us in a healthy state. But just going back to this, that's why minerals are so powerful, is that they hold that resonance and allow them to actually, stay in that frequency. So BioWell is actually a machine that does a lot of studies on the resonance of the actual frequencies. And so what I wanted to share with you here is how this machine was picking up the fields. And so what it does is it picks up the fingers, and each single fingerprint actually connects into a different organ according to whatever it is that organ is on that fingertip. And when it sends an electric shock, it actually allows that shock to create an imprint. And then with that imprint, they can find out how much vitality is in the body. And so I started doing testing with people that were clients. And here you could see the first scan where this client has a lack of energy. And you can see how small the actual chakras are, or the average is the 3 joules. And so when I actually gave them certain vitamins, you can start to see that their bodies started to enhance themselves, and the energy within the chakras actually started becoming closer together and larger as well. And that's because these actually create certain types of fields. Minerals create support, vitamins create love, protein create nurturing, carbohydrates creates energy, and lipids create spiritual balance. And so one of the other things I did was washing with salt water, and the salt water also helped to enhance the body, but it also projected all of the chakras to one side, because one side has an external effect of what's creating in the body, and the other side is more of an internal effect. So meditation, that's creating an effect on the body. And here we have the last actual study, which is where we've introduced crystals into a grid with the body. And you can see here the highest scale of awareness of bringing in higher levels of energy, and also bringing in an alignment. So the earth has a field, the trees have a field, everything on this planet is connected to these fields and life force. So when I studied with Dr. Robert Gilbert with the Vesica Institute, he was always talking about how these fields had to come into balance. And so that is what biogeometry is about. It's creating balance so that when we're in harmony, there is no need for polarity. So that's what biogeometry does, is it creates balance. And so they've already done wide scale harmonizations of electromagnetic fields, where they've actually shown studies with the Miracle of Hamburg, where they actually did a whole city that was dealing with these telecom providers, Swisscom, and they were having cows with tumors. There were people that were getting sick, the wildlife was leaving. And just by doing the corrections, they managed to change all of that and change what was happening to that town. And so what we're seeing with biogeometry is you can use shape, you can use color, you can use forces that are connected to nature to actually change and create healing, so that way you can actually change things that are contaminated. And that's what I wanted to show you, is that when you do corrections, especially on somebody's home, what's happening is, as you can see in the home, whenever we cut off or we change the correction on those lines, not only does it change the house, but it changes the surrounding neighbors as well, because now all of those lines that are corrected have a certain ability to change on whoever else is on those lines also around them as well. So we're starting to see how we can create these pockets of areas of land that if we have enough people correcting their homes, that we can create pockets of healed and energized homes that are sending this out into the grid lines. So liquid plasma and fields is another thing that I wanted to talk about really quickly. And basically what plasma is matter. It's not matter, it's not liquid, it's not gas, it's plasma, which is the fourth state of matter, which is basically energy. And it is also what we start to see as a fracturing through the heat that breaks up the atoms that form this gas. So when this happens, the electrons break free and they get excited and start emitting photons, and they're like small particles of light which illuminate everything. And as this happens, more electrons break free and the atoms bump into each other and create almost like a chain reaction. As these fields occur, they produce their own magnetic field, getting bigger and bigger, and they act as seas of electrons until you can eventually see plasma as like a ball of light. So these are basically plasma GANs that you can see, and they are created using the Kesh Foundation, which is from Mehran Kesh, who's been studying this for about 30 or 40 years. And he's basically saying conventional technology is no longer helping our planet. And so we need to use these fields in order for us to create the transformation that we need on this planet. And here we can see that you can use these we can use GANs in agriculture. And what they have is this is all free online, by the way. They've built machines that can save up to 16% on electricity, and where some people have been able to save up to 33% using these models. But what's really amazing is that they put these GANs into these lettuce farms that would normally during the midday heat have this wilting that would be happening with the lettuce. But with the actual GANs, what was happening is that 25 days later, instead of it being wilted, so this was the same harvest but a different crop, obviously, they were showing that these lettuces were absorbing these fields and had complete health. And so what I believe we can also be doing is putting in these plants to have these fields that can also be generating this energy in our homes and creating this field in our own homes. And so that is what I wanted to share with you, is that literally we can start to be adding these around our home with plasma, with architecture, and start to connect into the consciousness of Golden Mother Earth. And this is some of the pictures I wanted to share with you, is that some of these actual beings that have come through in these activated parts that we have worked with. And so I'm really excited to share this with everybody and think that this is a great way of moving forward for the 5D, is starting to work with technology and spirit. So I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you for your time.